running 100 miles isn't just a singular effort. It's a journey through hundreds of miles of training. But how do we get our hands on that first buckle? Hello and welcome to the Ultra Running Podcast with me, Coach Marshy. So how do we get our hands on that first buckle? Well, today we're going to introduce the guest, who is Andrew Carver. Welcome, Andrew. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Andrew. You know, what do you do day to day? What do you do in the running world? Are you part of a running club, etc.?
I am, yeah. I'm an engineer, so day to day I sit at a desk, which is the worst thing for runners. You know, they always say, you know, be active, but sitting at a computer most of the day and on video calls. Started running, so I joined High Runners, the club that you set up in 2015. Yeah. So I joined in 2015, and the reason I joined was because I'd just recently changed jobs, and previously I was commuting down to London, and so I was cycling to the train station and back every day. So I was getting a good 10, 15 mile bike ride every day.
Yeah.
And I missed that with the new job, and I could feel myself getting more and more out of shape and less healthy.
Yeah. So for those that have just realised that we're talking about High Runners again, so that's the club that I founded in 2014, and Andrew joined very soon after that in 2015. So we've been on a bit of a journey together through each other's individual journeys, if you like, as well. We've both been there throughout that. So we know a lot about each other, but today we're going to hopefully capture some stuff that that Andrew's been through, and like we said in the intro there, talking about that first buckle. So let's set the scene, Andrew. The Thames Pathway 100 miler race in 2021, Centurion running. So you find yourself on that start line and it's your first 100 mile attempt. What's going through your head and what are you feeling?
I really was on the start line, not knowing whether I'd finish that or not.
Wow.
I didn't know because it was so far from what I'd done before. I'd done a 50 miler, but 50 mile to 100 mile is a big step. And, you know, how would the body react? How would the stomach react? Everything. I really didn't know. So it was a lot of anxiety there.
You know, it's really interesting because obviously I know you quite well, and anyone, you know, some of the listeners will know you, but most of them won't. And I would say that for Andrew to respond to that question in that way, for me, Andrew, to hear you say that is like, wow, he actually wasn't sure whether he would finish that event. So let's kind of unpick it then. So let's go all the way back. So your running journey, obviously you talk about joining our club back in 2015. Did you run ever in your life before that?
I did at university. So about 30 years prior to that, I did 10Ks, and I even did a Cambridge half marathon in 1988. I think they just did a 1 or 2 back then before it was an annual event that is now.
Yeah. So with that in mind, you obviously had a big gap and then you came back to High Runners in 2015. And what was the goal when you first came, other than, you know, you'd missed that kind of activity of cycling to the train station? But in terms of running goals, did you have any?
I really didn't. I did the odd park run when I was fit through cycling and got to a reasonable time, but didn't really have any goals. It was really just to have something regular to prompt me to stay fit.
Yeah. So if we jump forward then in that journey, I remember standing on the start line of Cambridge Half Marathon many times, and you've been there, you know, since it reintroduced itself in 2012. So you sort of worked up to a half marathon, and let's forget what happened from that point up until you got to half marathon. And then you find yourself on the half marathon line, and tell me a bit about that. How did it go year on year? Did you improve? Did you try and go for better times? How did that kind of work for you?
I did. I built up. So, Camborne 10K and the Water Beach 10K. So a lot of local 10Ks around here that I did. And then I signed up for the Great North Run because I heard that that's an exciting half marathon to do.
Yeah.
And so in 2016, I think I did the Great North Run. So it's September time, isn't it? And so ran that, and basically we've collapsed over the line. I was so exhausted, and I laid down on the ground, and the marshals were trying to move me on.
Yeah.
Such a hard effort.
So you do that half marathon, and then filling in the gaps for a few of the guys, because we want to talk about your ultra journey really, but filling in the gaps, you sort of improve year on year, and you end up doing, if I'm right, one of the Cambridge half marathons in sub 1:30. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. But
and then
was on my journey, I think, in December, I decided that I'd like to try and qualify for Boston Marathon.
Right.
And that was off the back of a half marathon. That was the furthest I'd ever run at that time. And also if I'd double my half marathon time, that wasn't even the Boston qualifier. So it was quite a lofty goal.
Okay.
And so I put in a good winter's worth of training, and got to a reasonable time at Cambridge Half.
So what year was that?
2017.
2017. Okay. So I know you qualified for the Boston Marathon. So obviously you went to Boston and did that. So would you say from that Cambridge Half Marathon, from that point there on until you did the Boston Marathon, would you say that was the changing point in your kind of recent running history in terms of your achievement and what you thought you might be able to do?
I'd say it set the goal, because I'm pretty determined. So I set myself a goal, and then I try and figure out how to get there. And sometimes there's a lot of steps. And so that was, at the time, a marathon was pretty much the biggest I'd heard of. And so that was the goal.
So there you find yourself at Boston. What year was that? Sorry.
Yeah, 2018.
So 2018 Boston. Yeah. And anyone who follows the running world will basically remember that one as the washout year. It was pretty rainy, right?
It was horrendous, yeah.
And so you go there, you complete your marathon, and then, as you've just mentioned, you say, that's the longest you'd heard of. And you're thinking, you went to Boston, and you've done various marathons since. However, you decided you wanted to get into the ultra running world. Now, I've got a question based on a Saturday Solo interview that I did on myself recently, which was, I've got this theory that we get into the ultra running world based on one of three things. And they are that you see something in the media or on social media, YouTube, whatever, Netflix, someone who was doing it, or it was just a natural next step for you in your journey. If you had to pick one of those categories, what was it that happened to you?
Yeah, it's the third. So I'm challenge driven, and
it was that natural next step for you.
Natural next step.
That's right. Cool. So let's just fast forward. When was your first ultra marathon? When was it, and what was it?
Well, the first ultra marathon is technically, it was a 50K, and it was in King's Forest near Thetford.
Yeah.
And I ran it like a marathon. It's 50K. And so I went off pretty much at slightly below marathon pace, I would say, but it was cross country. So it was, and then I just tried to hang on for the last, 6-7 miles beyond the marathon. Yeah. And that pretty much worked. I was beaten up at the end of it, but you'd expect to be, I think.
Yeah. So, I know personally that when we talk about sort of my journey, and, I very much look at Andrew as a mentor. You're definitely a mentor for me. You're very interested in the sport, and you read a lot around it. And, I remember going to a 35 miler recently, and you making that same, cracking that sort of joke about it, that there's that, it's pretty much a marathon, right? You could run it like a marathon. And I think that distance, there is that side of it. And I see that a lot talking to the guys that we personally know. They would approach it in that way. But if we go beyond that and go to the next sort of level up, call it 50 miles or 100K, what's your kind of experience around that kind of level?
Yeah, so then, as I said, I set myself a goal of trying to qualify for the UTMB. So I'm a big fan of running, and end of August every year there's the UTMB and UTMB live on YouTube. You can sit all weekend and watch running, and they have helicopters following the runners, and now they have actually electric bikes and all sorts, so it's fantastic. So I was watching that in I think August of probably 2018, and I said, oh, I'd like to qualify for the CCC or UTMB.
Yeah.
So what do I need to do to do that? Oh, okay, you need UTMB points. What do you do? How do you get the UTMB points? Okay, there's certain races, and they have to be big enough races to get enough points to qualify. So with a friend Ian, we identified a couple of races that we could do before the end of the year to get in the qualifying window. And so we identified it was the Beacons Ultra, which is a couple of laps around the Brecon Beacons, and it was just short of 50 miles, I think, at the time. And the other one was the Sunrise Ultra.
Yeah, so just before we go any further, I'll declare that we're not sponsored by any race organisers or any brands. So, but we do like to build relationship with these people, because these people inspire us, that provide these events for us to go to. And, Darkside Running, what they created at the Sunrise in 2019, it was in December. So it was pre-pandemic, and it was the inaugural year. And, I sound like I'm really passionate about it, talking about it now. It's because I went along and drove Andrew and our friend Ian to the start line, and then kind of crewed it a little bit, I guess, along the way. And what a great event that was. It was an overnight round the east coast of the UK here in from Clay-on-Sea to Great Yarmouth, right?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about running alongside the North Sea overnight.
First of all, we looked at it and we thought we couldn't believe our luck, because it was a reasonably flat course that gave enough points. So we thought, how can this be? But we realized that they don't give away points easily, because it was hard in other ways. So the overnight element, so it starts at sunset or at 10 o'clock at night, and you have until sunrise to get to Great Yarmouth is the goal. And this one, so we did it in 2019, and for the first 3 or 4 hours there was driving wind coming offshore, and driving rain as well. So it was tough and sapping.
Yeah, and then just to go with the North Sea and the cold and that offshore winds and rain, you literally take a couple of 100 meters on a trail path out to Shingle, right?
Yeah.
And what was that, the first 4 miles?
Yeah, first 2 or 3 miles, I think, along the Shingle beach.
Yeah.
Where every step and your foot just sinks and slides.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I think, like you're saying, the UTMB points, they're not given away for free. You've got to work for them. And then later on down that coastline, just really briefly, you were jumping seals and running sand dunes, right?
Yeah, I mean, they diverted the course so that it didn't go along the beach, because there was a load of seals on that section. But some of the seals had worked their way up onto the path that they diverted us onto. And under headlight, we couldn't see them at all. So they just looked like rocks, and suddenly just rear up and come out. It's quite scary.
Well, at least in the UK, there's seals and not bears or cougars or whatever else you might get in the States. So, and in Canada. So yeah, I guess we're lucky just to have seals and cows to deal with. So UTMB points, you do those 2 races, you're successful, you grab those points, then what happens?
Well, because it's like London Marathon, so it's a lottery. So you go into a ballot, and so I was fully expecting to not get in at all. And fortunately or unfortunately, I got a place in the CCC, which is one of the 5 races at UTMB.
Yeah.
It's the 100-kilometer race. And I got a place for 2020.
Right. So the pandemic hits, so that gets cancelled.
Pandemic hits, so yeah, that gets cancelled, which in hindsight actually was pretty lucky, because I don't think I could have finished that race.
What, just because of inexperience, or?
Yeah, I didn't have the physical preparation for it. I don't think that I was a strong enough climber.
Yeah.
Because the CCC is 20,000 feet of climbing elevation, and just the first 3 or 4 hours, and you're actually climbing to 2,500 meters, which we have nothing in the UK to train on to get there.
Especially living in Cambridgeshire, right? Shocking.
Especially living on the fens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So obviously that didn't happen in 2020. It did happen in 2021, but I'm not even sure we were able to travel. So what's happened with your place? Is it carried over, or?
Yeah, so when they cancelled, they actually kept our money, nicely enough, but they did say that we've got a guaranteed place in either 2021, 2, or 3. And so we get the option to choose to defer it, which I'm going to do it next year now. So in 2022.
22, okay. That's cool. So obviously that becomes the goal and becomes a process, and you got those UTMB points and you qualified, you've got in on the lottery, and you've got that place now ready for 2022. But I remember a conversation we had, which we kind of joke about, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before. We were standing there listening to Lazarus Lake or someone at the National Running Show in 2020, just pre-pandemic, in the January. So the National Running Show in the UK, and we were at the ultra running stage hosted by Bad Boy Running, and we were listening to the conversation, but not the conversation on the stage, the conversation on the stage, but also around us. And we make a joke that the question wasn't about how many ultras people had done. It was how many 100s they'd done, right?
Yeah, certainly.
And we stood there and we chatted about it, and we realized that, hold on, we should do 100 miles. So you obviously then set that goal. I know you set that goal. So what made you set that goal? Was it that conversation, or was it just the general next step again?
It was a bit of both, really. So it was so with the UTMB being delayed, so I decided to set another challenge. And I know Centurion Running, who's another great organizing company. They run several 100-milers that are well waymarked and well organized. So I decided to look into what's involved in doing one of those. And so even to get in one of those, you need to do a 50-miler just to show that you've got a possibility of completing it, really.
Yeah. So you obviously had that in the bag.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd tried to. Was entered into a couple of other 50-milers to actually get it as a qualifier, and in the end, I just contacted them and said, "Look, I've done a 48-miler with quite a lot of ascent. Is that okay?" And they were happy that was okay. And in pandemic times, it's hard to get other races in. So
yeah, no, absolutely. So just before we get on to that, there we are in the pandemic of 2020, and there's a few ultra runners in our club, just so that everyone's aware. There's a few that do ultra running or have shown an interest, definitely. And basically, Andrew approaches me with our friend Ian in about, I think it was probably in May, maybe April, and identified that because we're in the pandemic, should we do something a bit different? Should we challenge ourselves in a bit of a different way? So basically, they're proposing to me that we do something called the accumulator, which people may be familiar with that phrase in the ultra running world. They may not be, but basically accumulator is where you take the date of any given month and you do the number of miles that the date represents. So for example, on the 1st, you do 1 mile, on the 15th, you do 15, and so on. So you do that every single day plus 1 mile until you complete the month. So Andrew and Ian decide to challenge me and themselves to doing this in the June of 2020, and in a word, we did it. What went through your head in A, setting the challenge, and B?
Yeah, it was a bit silly because there's it's a full month, so it's not like February where you only get the 28 days. But also, it was hot, wasn't it?
It was. It was boiling. Absolutely boiling.
Which makes it tough in terms of the drain, but. No, that was a massive learning experience in terms of the mental drive to get yourself out the next day. Certainly the last week when you do marathon after marathon.
Yeah, no, it was tough. And, I'll get your thoughts on this, actually. On the 27th, we celebrated. We all did it together on the 27th. We didn't break any COVID rules, but we went to a local reservoir, Grafham Water near us, and we all did it together, didn't we? And we celebrated that like it was over, and we still had the 28th, 29th, and 30th to go. So what was your take on that, on the 27th? It was a bit like that, right?
That was a great event. So it's a 9-mile loop around the reservoir. So we just did 3 loops around the reservoir. And it was great to get out and see other people, even at a distance.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was really effective for me. So obviously we're not in a lab, and we're not sports scientists in the sense of trying to find out answers to data, but you decided to plot some stuff during that accumulator and have a look at certain things. What was it that you plotted between the 3 of our datas, and what did you find?
Yeah, it was really the rate at which we slowed down across the month in terms of percentages. And it was very similar for the 3 runners. I mean, Ian was very strong throughout.
Yeah.
And, I slowed down at a certain percentage, and you were the same percentage.
Yeah.
Slowed down. So whether that's that we started too fast, I don't know. But
I think, was it day 21 we hit, and then we managed to maintain after that, was it? After day 21, we didn't get any worse.
Yep.
Yeah, which I found at the time really strange. Obviously, I love sports science and conditioning and things like that. So that was really interesting that you plotted it for us. So we've done that.
I did it again in the February of this year. I did another accumulator. Obviously, it was a lot easier being cooler.
Yeah.
And having already done one. But we were again in the lockdown, and so I couldn't go any more than 3 miles from the house. So that was a challenge in itself as well.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that in a moment, actually, in relation to your 100-miler. In fact, let's jump ahead to that now. So your 100-miler, the Thames Pathway Centurion race, when was it? In 21?
May.
Was it in May? It was in May.
It was May. So first week of May.
It was in its usual slot, and you're going to be on that start line, as we said earlier on, and the training leading up to it. I vaguely remember, if you can just tell us what you did. You kind of played with the accumulator week, sort of the sort of late teen mileage, I think.
Yeah, so I decided that, probably didn't need that much speed work, and it was really more endurance, and to try and bulletproof the legs and, make them adapted for the fatigue. So there were a lot of back-to-back runs. So I'd been reading a lot of books, and they all seem to say, okay, go back-to-back at the weekend with the longer runs. And so, yeah, I thought that the accumulator would be a great opportunity to build that kind of base. And being in February, it was far enough in front that I would have recovered from it by May.
Yeah.
And then again, I love data, and so I plotted it, and I saw that my main adaptations were actually in the third week.
Okay.
And so in the third week of April, I actually replicated that third week.
Okay, to
did
try
another accumulator. So yeah, so it's basically the 13 up to the 21 miles.
Okay. And you saw the most adaptations happen then, and you thought that would be a good footing for the 100-miler that was to come, obviously, in May.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you are. You're very target driven. I know that, but you've explained that here in the episode as well. And you're target driven. So you're going into this 100-miler. Did you have an expectation as to what you wanted to achieve?
I did. I had a big goal. I wanted to do 24 hours in a day. So that was kind of the tagline, or the challenge, because I thought of that as something that is epic. If you think 100 miles is a long way, and to do it in a day is a great challenge. And certainly Centurion recognized that, and they give a special buckle if you can do it in one day.
Okay, how does that work? Just quickly tell us how they do that. Yeah,
so there's a finisher's buckle that that everyone that beats the cutoff would get, and then there's a 100 miles in a day buckle, which is just has in a day written on the top.
Right. Is it a different color?
It's the same color. It's just a different molding, I think. And yeah, basically they pack that box up when the 24 hours ticks by, and then they get the other box out.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Because I've done. Some people would say that's like elitism, but I would disagree with anyone who would think that. I've done, I've done Ironman, and there's a strict cutoff in there. There's a cutoff for each individual discipline as well as you're going round, and that's there for a reason, right? Cutoffs are there for a reason, because it's not meant to be inclusive, and it's not meant to be easy, is it?
It's meant to be a challenge, isn't it? And yeah, you can set the level of challenge that you want, can't you? To some extent.
So what was the cutoff? What was the general cutoff?
The general cutoff was 28 hours.
Okay. So an extra 4 hours to get a buckle.
Yeah.
Basically, and then 24 hours or below to get the 100 miles in a day. So you've got that target, right? You're standing on that start line, and you've done, in what you've described here, a very good training bout leading up to it. So
I did, but then I was a little bit foolish, because 2 weeks before we were let out of lockdown, or strict lockdown.
Yeah.
And so we had a trip to Derbyshire where I went running in the hills, and obviously from January till March, I'd just been running in the fens, so on the flat, around a little circuit. And so all of my adaptations had been for flat running.
Yeah.
So, listening to one of your previous guests who said that every injury is a training fault, right?
Yeah.
And if you change something, and I changed something just for that one run, and picked up a niggle that turned out to be quite painful, and the frustration of that, and I was angry with myself, and just 2 weeks after all of the hard work, because 3 months I couldn't think of anything else pretty much other than this 100-mile and getting to the start and to the finish successfully.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting concept as well, what you say there about you couldn't think of anything else. But so you did this training run, and you're frustrated with yourself, and you know, you're going into the morning of, and you've woken up and you got yourself to the start line. Is that all playing on your mind?
It is, because the week before, and I went for a 7 or 8 mile run, and I had to walk home. I couldn't run home. It was that painful.
Okay.
So yeah,
no, really frustrating. And so you've put all this work in, you're frustrated with yourself, and on the start line, you're thinking about it. So straight away, that could work against some people, I guess, like in terms of mindset. Talk me through the first quarter, the first 25 miles. You know, how
in true style as well, there was a storm that came across as well. So there was it was raining heavily and high winds. So about 40 mile an hour winds again. Yeah.
So you've got all of that against you, and that first 25 miles that you're doing. So how did the first 25 go, first quarter?
Well, again, as you know, I'm quite a planner. I like to sometimes think and overthink things. And so I did have a plan for all of the paces that I wanted to hit at the various sections. And so I very much had a pace plan, and I'd say I pretty much stuck to it for that first, 15 miles, I would say.
Yeah.
Quite well. And
was it hard to stick to?
I'd try. It was quite a steady pace, so I wanted to not go off too fast. And I even remember talking to a guy that I was running with, and you know, we were talking about paces, and he was saying, okay, you know, I've got this and this goal, and I said, well, the pace is maybe a little bit hot. I'm going to have to let you go there. And so I let him go. And I did actually see him later in the race, as he was suffering a bit with the flat nature of it.
Yeah. So Thames Pathway, fairly flat, right? From London to Oxford, yeah?
Yeah, there's 2,000 feet of climbing over the 100 miles. So it's just the...
Even to us Fenland folk, we're all right with that. I think we can manage that.
We are, and that's the reason I chose it, because so I basically in my thought I had, okay, I'd like to do 100 miles in a day. Which 100 miler do I want to do? Do I want to do the North Downs way, South Downs way? They sound a little bit tough. Let's go for the Thames Path.
Yeah.
So
as you're going through that race, you know, you've explained how you got there. You explained about a few things that potentially were a hindrance on that build up and in your mind potentially as well. So then you get to halfway, and were there any thoughts in your mind around the halfway stage that stood out, or even that whole concept of, wow, I've got to do that again?
No, I mean, again, that's National Running Show, when James was up on the stage, he said, never pull out at halfway. Most people psychologically struggle to say that it's got the same to go again. And so I said, not even going to make a decision until 60 miles anyway.
Yeah.
And so that made the halfway point seem a lot better.
Yeah.
I mean, I had started to struggle with the paces, my pace chart that I'd set.
Yeah.
So the first 20 or 30 miles, I was pretty much nailing pretty easily. And then it was becoming tougher and tougher, because the terrain was really getting slippery and muddy. And I decided to try and run it in road shoes, which was a big mistake.
Okay. Anyone who's doing that event, who's listening to this, take that down as a note. Don't wear road shoes.
He could have got away with it had it been dry, but this storm that came through, it just soaked everything. So it was puddle jumping and muddy. And actually up to about 50 or 60 miles, it was okay. It was the 10 miles to Goring, which is the 70-mile aid station, which is the only place you can have a drop bag. So I had my trail shoes in the drop bag at 70 miles.
Wow,
because the last part of the run is actually more traily anyway.
Right, okay. So it makes sense to have them in that drop bag.
Yeah.
But you could have done with them 10 miles previous.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an interesting to hear those sorts of things as well. Not just specifics to that race, but actually, trying to think about those things. There's a lot to think about before you do 100 miles. It's a long way, right? A lot can change in 24 hours.
It is a long way. And actually, there's so many things that I've learned in doing it as well. And just little things like how to pack your backpack. I had a power pack for recharging my phone and my Garmin. And it was sat against my back. And just that rubbing for 20 hours, you can imagine.
Yeah.
Made my back sore, and having my phone in the front pocket on my hydration vest, actually, just how it rubs. You need to make sure that if you're doing anything for that long, that it's comfortable and it's all sorted out and organized.
Yeah, no, and I think so. Let's get to the final stages of that race then. So you wanted to do 100 miles in 24 hours. You wanted that buckle, 100 miles in a day. So your target was to get in within that time.
So I said it was getting harder and harder at 50 miles to maintain my pace chart. And so as it got to 60, 70, 80 miles, I was finding it even more tough and dropping even beyond that pace.
Yeah.
But luckily for the last, I guess, 10 or 20 miles on my pace chart, I had, maybe walking pace. So if I can't run, I'll have walking in my plan.
Yeah.
And so I knew that I needed to be faster than the 3.5 miles an hour that I had in my plan.
Yeah.
If I wanted to get there.
So what was it? How did it go?
There was a lot of mental maths, and I'm usually pretty good at it. But as you get tired, and if your fueling hasn't gone ideally, it's hard to concentrate. And also at nighttime under torchlight, when you're actually having to look at every step, it just uses so much of your brain power.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can relate at a sort of much lower level, but hopefully I'll find out. But we so what was your time? What did you get?
22.5 hours.
So 22.5 hours. So you weren't even close to the 24 in the end. It weren't like you were chasing it down. You got in.
It was about, I think, 75 miles that I figured that if I only walked the rest, it would be at just over 24 hours.
Right.
And so I pushed myself to run walk strategy by that time, and run as much as I could. So there weren't any other runners around at that time. It was I was just on my own, running.
Pretty lonely, right?
Yeah.
So would you say 100 miles could be a lonely place?
It definitely can. I mean, there were 350 runners, I think, in the event, and it was still in COVID regulations. So it was staggered starts anywhere between, I think, 7 and 9:30. And I think I started at about 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so, it was pretty strung out, and there were only 2 people allowed in the aid stations at a time. So there was a little bit of waiting there. But.
Yeah. No, interesting, as if, because 100 miles isn't hard enough, let alone having to do it under COVID restrictions so that it can go ahead safely as well, right? Not James's fault at Centurion, or not yours.
No, he did a fantastic job, and all of the crew there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, so you did it. You got your 100 miles in a day buckle as well. obviously since then, I've come and watched you very recently in an event, another Centurion event at the Wendover Woods, the 50 miler, which was 10-mile loops, half the distance, but with 10,000 feet of elevation.
Yep.
So talk to me about the differences or what's gone through your mind over the last couple of weeks since you did that event, and, how you compare it to the 100 and things like that.
Well, as I said, I realized how woefully ill-prepared I would be for the UTMB next year. And I did Ultra Trail Snowdonia this year, again with Ian. And again, that showed me, what it's like to have to climb for so long. And I bought myself a soft plyo box, and so forced myself, because I don't usually watch much television, but forced myself to watch television and just step up, step down, and alternating every 10 steps to one leg and then the other as a predominant lead leg, just to try and build some climbing strength in. And so that's kind of been the journey this year. So I've done the CCC and then the Lakes in a Day, which was another great adventure.
Yeah.
And then Wendover Woods, which we pretty much thought, okay, we'll turn up to that and it'll be, a nice, easy, 50 miler. It's certainly after Lakes in a Day, where we've got some pretty big hills that we're going up.
Yeah.
And man, was that surprisingly hard. It was a tough event.
Yeah, I guess, so I should have been in that event with you, and I decided to go and recce it. So I managed to give you, I didn't make the event start line, but I managed to give you a little bit of insight that it perhaps wasn't the National Forestry that we thought it might have been. And just a nice, it's on the race advert, right? It says 10,000 feet. It's not like it's a secret, but you think you're going to go to a National Forestry, and maybe there's a few climbs in there that would have contributed to that 10,000 feet, 5 laps of that or whatever. But in reality, it was pretty much up and down all the way, right?
It was. And with the lap element, you knew what was coming. You knew exactly what was coming. And it wasn't easy.
Yeah. No, I think there's some good lessons there to be learned, and certainly ones that we'll pass on to our running club for sure. So your ultra journey, it continues, right? So you've mentioned obviously UTMB. What would you say is the kind of bucket list race or the bucket list event to take part in?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this, and I think for me it's got to be the Dragon's Back race.
Right, okay, yeah.
Which is my big challenge.
Yeah.
There are some epic races out there. There's the Spine race, which is epic in a different way, and there's Marathon des Sables, again epic in a different way. But yeah, the Dragon's Back is the one that excites me. And again, so I sat down and planned, what do I need to do to get there? So it won't be next year, but potentially maybe the year after.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was gonna say that. I was gonna ask, because obviously my experience with you is what you've explained here to us today, is that you have a goal, you look at what that goal is, and then you do the steps back in order to know what it is that you've got to do to achieve that. So I'm assuming you're kind of planning that Dragon's Back as we sort of speak and record this episode. That's kind of the stuff that's going through your kind of head, and your periodization plans and things that you're putting in are going to be based around that, right, over the next sort of 18 months?
Yeah, they are. Yeah. And there's because I haven't done a stage race before.
Right.
Okay, we've done the Accumulator Ultra, which you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Which is kind of similar stresses, but that's pretty easy, isn't it? Just running around and all on the flat.
Running around Histon.
Sanitized, sleeping in your own bed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But a stage race is next level. I haven't done any stage races, and so next year I'd like to put a couple of those in, just to get used to how to be efficient in the overnight stations, how to recover quickly, how to not go off too hard on on day one, day two.
Yeah.
I don't know, for those that don't know, the Dragon's Back is a 6-day race, and actually it has was it 57,000 feet of climbing.
Wow.
Yeah, which is so twice up Everest or something.
Yeah. I mean,
in 6 days.
That is going to be epic. That, that's a journey. And you answer the question that I've kind of highlighted and perhaps made a thing for us here on the Ultra Running podcast about how did each individual ultra runner get into it. And yours is, not just how you got into it, but actually everything seems to be on this natural next level or next step of challenge.
And actually my wife always says about her elastic limits, and okay, we can't imagine it now. So it's when the marathon was the longest distance I'd heard of at the time. My elastic limits have moved a little bit, and so
I like that. So anyone who wants to it's interesting actually, because Andrew's wife Jan has been on the show. She's a previous episode and titled Couch to Ultra. So go and listen to that one. So just on that note, obviously you've been involved in the ultra world. You're very involved in our running club on a local level, and one of your sons and your wife are both into this as well.
Yep.
So what's it like taking part in an ultra marathon and in the ultra world of training, but then also being a husband and a dad to people that are striving for similar stuff?
Yeah, no, it's great to be able to share their successes as well. And I know the excitement and the nervousness on the line. So when I was supporting Mike over in Snowdonia when he did his Sky race, and Jan when she's doing her races as well, it's great to be able to be there in the excitement, and actually you learn a lot through supporting and crewing for these races as well. It's an invaluable part of the journey and the learning.
Yeah, no, I'd back that up massively. Coming and crewing you guys across the sunrise there, it was following you through the night and just standing on the side of the North Sea and giving you a clap was very eye-opening from a...
Yeah, and very welcomed as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm sure. It was great. It was great to follow you on that journey and see your emotions at various points as well. And I think if you're not there and you don't get to see that, you can't even expect to know how that would be if you've not ever seen it with your own eyes. And seeing you in an aid station, the indoor aid station, and you guys needed a hand with battery changes and stuff for your lights and whatever, and seeing that, it gives you, and it then gives me as a runner the opportunity to know that that's going to happen if I continue to participate. That will be how I feel in that moment at some point. So the rest of this year you're going to go back to the sunrise, but you're going to do the full, right?
Yeah, I'm going to try the full. Yeah, so did the half sunrise, as they call it, which is the 45 miles. So this year I'm going to try and do the 87 miles, which is the full sunrise ultra. So that actually starts at sunset.
Yeah.
So just before 4 o'clock.
And for anyone who's familiar with the Wash area, that is in Snettisham in the Wash, basically, right near King's Lynn. And you literally go out of the Wash and round East Anglia, all the way down, round the coastline to Great Yarmouth, which is epic. So, and full of sand, which isn't easy to run on, right?
It was sand and pebbles, yeah.
Sand and pebbles. So, yeah, no, awesome. So, just in a quick sentence, what's the worst thing that you've experienced during an ultra marathon?
Well, actually, the Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
The year that you did it as well, I think there were several from the club that did it. So again, it was a 10-mile laps, and Oh, it was a great event, and we did it. I did it with my wife Jan, and we did 100 miles between us. So as a team, and it was so hot. And I think whether it was inexperience, I went off far too fast, and you got 24 hours or so to finish. There's no reason to go off like as if you're in a race. And yet I did the first couple of laps at, a reasonable pace. And it was so hot that I had such gastric problems on that race.
I remember it well. I remember it well, Andrew.
Terrible.
I do remember it well.
So I think every race that you do, you learn a little bit more, don't you?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I've ever taken. And I think being that sponge and absorbing, even that day, watching you that day, and I would argue, if it's all right to say, it wouldn't be the case now, but I would say I probably had a little bit more ultra experience than you at that point. And even watching you that day, I gained so much from doing that. I mean, don't get me wrong, guys that are listening, that's very much tables have turned now. Andrew is my mentor very much on these things, and I really enjoy hearing his stuff so that I can absorb it as a sponge and learn from anything that you guys do. But even that day where I had done that event a few times and had done another 50 miler elsewhere, I watched you guys, and even though I could have potentially foreseen that, I don't know, but I watched it and I thought, oh wow, must take note of that. Don't do that. Don't ever make that mistake in the future. And sometimes when you talk about it, we forget about that really until you talk about it. And actually it'd be really handy for anyone listening to really make a note of that and remember, you're not in a 10K, you're not in a half marathon. If you're on a lapped ultra, that doesn't mean you do each lap as a 10K lap or a 10-mile lap. You don't do it like a race. You do it for a whole race, and you just see it as aid station, kind of those aid station points. But yeah, no, I do remember that. I remember you and Jan doing that as I believe it was an anniversary special, was it?
It was, yeah. It was our 25th anniversary, and actually our 50th birthday year as well. So
why not go for an ultra marathon?
Yeah, decided to do 100 miles between us. So.
Yeah, no, epic.
Yeah,
absolutely
we
epic.
did. So no, that's a really fond memory of achieving that. But it was one of the hardest, I think, or the lowest points that I've got to in an ultra marathon.
Yeah, and great that you've built on that since then. Your journey since then has been great to watch. So, so what does running mean to you, and what does running give you?
Yeah, it gives me a time to, I guess, to go out and not think about anything else, or to focus on just aspects of running. Really, it's it's just something that I can challenge myself with, and it's it's just something that I'm a fan of running and everything running, and I like to hear other people's stories. I like to watch races, I like to run in races, and I like to see what affects performance. So, and part of the challenge of how do you train up for certain events. So like I said, I did the UTS this year, which is the Ultra Trail Snowdonia.
Yeah.
And that would have been a car crash without going and wrecking it, I think, and doing some specific training over in Snowdonia.
Yeah.
But I love the opportunity to go for holidays with the family and go and run in Snowdonia. That was
awesome.
Part of the journey.
No, absolutely awesome. I love that. And we are. There's a lot of us that are fans in our club of the sport. It goes beyond just running ourselves, but actually the challenge of how to do is kind of our thing collectively, I would say. We haven't got anyone who's massively experienced in that before the club existed and decided to make the club on that. This is all, we're all, whoever goes to the 100 miler first, in your case, it was you, when myself and Simon went back and did the 70 milers, we're going to these places for the first time ever as a club as well. And it you can just see this effect down the club, even if they don't have an aspiration to do an ultra marathon. One of the biggest things I've seen is that from the achievements in the ultra world, how it has affected the rest of our running club in a positive way.
Yeah. And certainly when I started, I was just doing 10Ks, and I saw Nige, yourself, and two of the others all doing half marathons and marathons. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe that is, achievable.
Give it a go.
Give it a go. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And what a journey so far, Andrew. So if you had to give a couple of tips or a few tips to someone who wanted to do their first 100-miler, what would that be? What would those tips be?
I'd say definitely consistency in training. So don't overdo it. So you need to get to the start line fit and healthy. Certainly the back-to-back long runs are a staple for anything that is that long. Because as I mentioned, there was a chap that I was running with early on where I said, your pace is too hot, you're going to have to go, and maybe see you later, but maybe not. Good luck if not. And at 60 miles, his quads were gone, and his hamstrings, because he's not used to running on the flat for so long. But we're blessed with running on the flat in the fens. We can train on our local busway routes, and
no, interesting. I'll certainly absorb that as I continue my journey back from injury and towards my goal of that 100 miles. So awesome stuff, Andrew. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that story with me. And actually, it's great to actually have the time where we can sit and chat through it in a little bit more depth like we have today. So really appreciate having you on, mate.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you. Thanks, Neil.
Absolutely awesome. So, guys, hope you all enjoyed the show. And if you did, if you could go and give it a rating, that would be much appreciated. And any reviews would also be appreciated. Do not forget to share it on to anyone who you think may find Andrew's interview interesting, especially anyone who is approaching that first sort of 100-mile distance as well. So we're all done here today. So I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I look forward to meeting you here again to discuss more on the Ultra Running Podcast with me, Coach Marshy.